It's live now. Bit of a stops again. Should we just
blame Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah, we'll blame Cambridge Analytica.
Can you just type stuff? I guess we'll get started.
Yeah, there's one person who's going to slip in the back.
So just to help with the people that are watching, I don't know how many people, you might have no one watching, but it's just if someone asks a question, just to repeat it, just so people can hear.
I'll be able to hear it, will I? Or?
We'll tell you it.
Oh, you'll tell me it?
No, if people ask questions here, just in case
they
can't
ask
hear these questions, just to kind of repeat.
Yeah. What if they ask questions?
I'm gonna ask their questions.
Okay, bear with our technical difficulties. This is I'm not gonna, if it goes, too bad.
Fine,
you guys made it,
yeah.
We're not gonna sorry. But welcome to LBK's Wag Night. This is our amazing, special, one-time ever evening with Dr. Jane Sterling. And I'd like to have a big thank you to Roberta Wedge here, who it was her idea and really wanted to get someone in who was a specialist in nether regions, maybe. Because I think we all have questions about those things, and if you do have questions, please share them. There will be time to ask them. And also, if you are joining us live, you can post your questions and we will bring them up for you. So we just ask you guys to sign in so we can keep track of who comes and who's interested in what topics, that sort of thing. We normally run sessions about practical bike maintenance every second and fourth Monday of the month. But this is one of those Mondays when we're doing something a bit different. So if you've got any other ideas of other things you'd like to see, Roberta just suggested bicycle ambulance people, getting them to talk about what they do. We can do that potentially. And I guess we'll talk a bit more at the end, but we'll just see how it goes. We just need to be out by 9, so you can take as much time as you want. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Sterling.
Good. Well, please call me Jane. It's my pleasure to be here as well, because I don't often get a chance to talk to a whole crowd of people who are keen and regular cyclists presumably. So for me, it's educational, helpful too. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm here. I don't know if you know the backstory. I'm a dermatologist, so I look after skin for patients who have something wrong with their skin. So it's always a different side of the coin to talk to people who aren't really patients, but obviously may have potential problems with their skin. So that's really nice. How I came to be here was because one of my special interests is vulval diseases. And that might seem a sort of funny area of skin disease to get into, but I started off because I had a research interest in viruses, and I'm sure you all know that the HPV virus is responsible for cervical cancer, and that can cause a similar sort of change and cancers on the external surface, on the penis, perianal skin, around the back passage, and on the vulva and in the vagina. So that was my research area, and so I sort of grew up an interest in skin problems in the vulval area as well, and I've been doing that as a particular interest for over 30 years. So I've seen a lot of vulvae pass through my practice. As part of that, I don't quite know how it happened. One day I received an email from the, what's it called now, the English Institute of Sport, who were working with the Olympic team, the cycling team up in Manchester, and they said, we recognise that there's a problem with our female cyclists with their vulval skin, and would you be interested in joining a workshop to see what we can do about it? And that led to a series of meetings up in Manchester in the Velodrome Centre there, which was very exciting. I mean, to meet the Olympic squad before the Rio Olympics and to talk to them and see how it all functioned there was something, again, it's an experience that you don't expect to happen. So I went up there a few times, and they were aware that women elite cyclists did have quite a problem with their undercarriage, but they were very reticent about talking about it. And it's not surprising. They had an all-male coaching team. They had a male doctor, male physiotherapists. There was one female physiotherapist who looked after the Paralympic squad, but it was a very male support team that they were working with, and so understandably they were reticent to sort of put their hand up and say, I'm sore down below. So they had already started to investigate the sort of problems that the women were having, and were developing an app that the women could use to report in to their team, to their support team, that they were having trouble today or the last week, and they could do that in a discreet manner without having to kind of to sort of put themselves out there, if you like, to own up to what problems they were having. So I had a few visits up there, and we devised a program of care of the vulval skin, what they should look out for, when they should take a rest from cycling, and what they could do to try and minimise or protect against problems with the skin, and what to look out for. So I didn't see the women as patients at all. They had their own doctor, and the word is that it helped, and they didn't have so many problems before the Rio Olympics. But I didn't observe that myself. But it's nice to think that perhaps it did make a bit of a difference. So, and that's how I come to be here, because on the back of this, Women's Hour had a special cycling program on one of the May bank holidays, and they asked me if I'd like to go along and do an interview, and they also came here, as you probably know, and watched Jenny, I think, doing a tyre replacement, and also that was talked through on the radio. So that's how I come to be here as well. So yes. So what I want to do with you tonight is to, I don't know, I'm not an elite cyclist. I cycle to work, and I confess I have not changed a tyre for about 30 years, but I once could do it. So I'm not very good at looking after bike equipment, but I hope I can help you look after your undercarriage equipment in a way that will stop you having any problems. So I've brought some questionnaires, and I was just going to distribute those because I know the sort of problems that elite cyclists have. That is, women who are in the saddle for 6 hours a day. But you're a different crowd, probably. I don't know if some of you do competitive cycling. Anybody do competitive cycling? Competitions? Go for long endurance rides at the weekend, some of you. So some of you might be in the saddle for 6 hours on an occasional day. 12, did you say? Very good. So there is a mixture, and I could imagine cycling on potholy roads is quite a challenge for anybody who's undercarriage, isn't it? So I'm going to pass those round. Don't fill them in now, but I just wanted you to have them now. The sort of slight tweak to the Women's Hour programme was that 2 days after that programme went out, I had my first ever coming off a bike accident and broke my shoulder and was out of action off my bike for about 3 months. But fortunately I can do all sorts of things with it now again. So I've experienced in 40 years of cycling, that was the first time I ever had a nasty coming off. So I'm a bit more of a cautious cyclist now, I guess. Okay, so now don't stand on ceremony. If there's something that I'm not saying clearly, you want to get explained as we go along, or questions that come to you, it's probably easier to go for the question as it comes into your mind, because if there's something that's tickled your interest, then probably there's somebody else who would be finding it interesting as well, to have it clarified or expanded on as we go along. So don't save them till the end. I will carry on talking if it's all quiet, but feel free to interrupt in whatever way you want to. So I wanted to give you the questionnaires now, just because the list of problems is quite long. That's that list in the middle. And the Olympic cycling squad had all of those problems. Not all of them had all of the problems, but amongst them, somebody had all of those sort of problems, particularly chafing of the skin, rubbing it sore. They had sore areas, they had numbness, some of them had little lumpy bits in the skin. They often had like paper cut cracks in the skin, which is, you know, a paper cut on your finger is tiny but is quite sore. So they had all of those sort of problems in different quantities or different frequencies. So trying to deal with those or prevent them happening was obviously a key way to try and improve the functioning of the team and improve the success of the teams. In talking to them, it seemed that those sort of problems with their vulval area developed particularly, you know, when they were young and they started to do a lot more cycling. So if you're just cycling around town or from work or something, I guess you're probably like me, is if you get a new bike or a new saddle, for the first week or so it just doesn't feel right. You can feel your bones, it feels bruised, it feels uncomfortable quite often, but then it kind of adapts and you feel quite comfortable on it. But these women, when they were upping their training, becoming competitive cyclists, entering competitions, going out at the weekends, doing extra cycling during the week, that's when they started to notice the problems of discomfort and soreness developing from time to time or continuously in their lives. So it seemed to be related to how much they were on the saddle. And you can imagine these women, and the men too, of course, who are cycling around in the velodrome or out on the roads for 6 hours, perhaps every day. They're doing things to their body that the body's not really designed to do. And all elite athletes are the same. They're all doing much more than our body is really designed to do, and it's not surprising that footballers or runners or gymnasts or whatever it might be do run into problems with their bodies as they go through their time as an athlete. So I've put on the questionnaire, if you're willing to fill it in, to give me a little idea about the sorts of problems women like you do get with their vulval skin, the vulval area, just to see if the kind of cycling you're doing ever gives you problems down below in your undercarriage or whatever you want to call it. Because maybe it's fine, but maybe you're here because you have noticed problems, or you think you're going to be doing more cycling, or you know people who've had problems. It just may be an opportunity to think things through. The other area, perhaps a bit contentious, that we came across with the Olympic team was the business of pubic hair. And it's very fashionable now to shave everything off. And whatever you do with your hair on whatever part of the body you're talking about, of course, is your choice. The question was this contributing to the problem that these women are having? And there are a couple of arguments that suggest that it would be a problem. First of all, pubic hair is there for a reason, and the reason we have hair in our armpits and in the vulval area is traditionally to help kind of disperse the sweat and disperse the odours. As you know, pheromones, very important for animals, do have a bit of a basis in us as well, although we disguise our own body odours much more now than perhaps we were designed to do. But giving off your body odour, of course, in an animal is very much part of attracting a mate. And we don't necessarily think about it like that. We think about perhaps suppressing our body odours as being more attractive. But in evolutionary terms, spreading your body odour by having hair that will disperse the odour more is part of the business about identifying yourself. But of course it does help to disperse sweat. So if you think about having completely unshaven armpit hair, your sweat will sort of pass down the hair and it will evaporate from a much bigger surface area than if you shave completely, and then you've just got the skin surface area for it to disperse from. So hair does help sweat to evaporate more quickly. And so for cyclists, let's keep it to that, shaving the pubic hair means that your lycra, your padding, whatever, is right up against the skin, whereas if you have a generous layer of pubic hair, there's a little bit of a sort of layer of air circulation, not a lot, but perhaps a little bit of air circulation. So that's likely to keep things a bit less sweaty. Now, I haven't done any experimental analysis of humidity and sweatiness in cyclists' groins, but theoretically that's a possibility. The other thing is, of course, that to remove hair, it's a trauma for the skin. So whether you're shaving it or waxing it or using a cream to remove it, all of those measures can damage the skin. And if you imagine if you're doing quite a bit of damage to your skin just from cycling and being on the saddle for so many hours, adding another layer of skin damage can be quite a bother. So we talked about that and thought of ways around it. The best way, not necessarily achieving the aesthetic that you desire, is to leave a bit of stubble. Now that's usually not socially acceptable. You don't really want a stubbly bikini line. You want a really smooth bikini line, don't you? But from the point of view of allowing the skin to function, you don't want to razor onto the skin because you can get tiny little cuts with that. You don't really want to use a cream because, as you know, if you use Nair or something, it sort of dissolves the hair, but it also dissolves the surface layer of the skin as well. So as you scrape off the hair, you kind of scrape off the top layer of skin, so you're making your skin more fragile. And if you wax or something like that, you're pulling out the hairs from their roots, which again is a trauma to the base of the hair. So all of those have their own problems. If you were to use, like the cutting a beard, those razors with a guard to leave just a bit of stubble, that gets rid of the hair, most of it, but doesn't actually touch onto the skin if you use it properly. So that would be an ideal if you wanted to reduce pubic hair, but it may not give you the desired result for the beach. And of course, today's fashion is to remove a lot more pubic hair, not just the bikini line, to remove a lot more. And that's come on the back of perhaps more awareness of seeing pubic skin in the telly, porn movies. It's become more normal to get rid of all pubic hair. So it's a fashion, and I'm not going to tell you to do or not to do it, but I'm just talking about what removing hair does to your skin.
Can I just support you anecdotally here? So I used to be a remover, and I have stopped removing, and it has made the world of difference to my cycling life. Yeah, it actually does work. Yeah, so stop it. I'm telling you not to, even if you don't.
Okay, well that's helpful because I never really got any feedback from the Olympic cyclists. We weren't in that kind of a relationship. So advice was given, and I never got any real feedback from individuals. So that's helpful.
We've got someone called Karen who also agrees. Okay. We've also got a question on the issue of chamois cream. Are you going to touch on that? Or?
Yeah, I'll come on to saddles and creams and stuff. Yeah. Okay. Save that one. If I forget about it, we'll come back to it. So that's the pubic hair story. The other thing that's very important, and I'm sure some of you will have some own personal experiences about it, is wearing the right clothes. Now, it was fascinating talking to the Olympic squad because they are sponsored, of course, and they have a sponsor who provides their clothing, which they use for training in, and then if they're actually doing a competition event, then they have their kind of fancy suits. But they wear their sponsored lycra outfits for everyday training. And most often they have the bib shorts, which you'll know are like cycling shorts with suspenders. They wear those most often. And then for more competition type events, they'll have the all-in-one suits. But the sponsors provided the bib shorts, or I think the suits, in kind of like small, medium and large. And of course we're all very different shapes and sizes, and so some of us have long bodies or short bodies, some of us have big hips or narrow hips, and big thighs or narrow thighs. And you can imagine that if you have something that's right in the body length, depending on how broad you are, it'll kind of pull or not pull. So sometimes they were wearing outfits that wrinkled up a little bit in the groin because, you know, they weren't quite the right shape, or they pulled up a bit hard, so they were pulling upwards. And so they were, curiously, for an elite crowd, they were sort of limited by the outfits that they were given. So the other thing that seemed to be very important was to make sure that you got the right shape of outfit for you. And unless you're in the Olympic team, you probably make sure that if you buy some cycling shorts, you get the ones that feel comfortable. You don't get the ones that kind of pull up a bit, because obviously they're going to rub, and you don't get the ones where you find you've got lots of folds in the groin that you obviously don't look that attractive, but also will tend to rub. So you may be in a better situation that you can buy and wear the things that fit you. So that was a bit of a surprise. So hopefully it's easy to make a mistake, isn't it? So with any kind of clothing, you go into the shop, it looks good, it feels comfortable, then you start to wear it and you think, no, it wasn't the right one. But hopefully you get the opportunity to choose something that's right for you. Okay, so that's clothing. Saddles. When I first went to workshop, there was a lot of discussion about saddles. And if you're competitive cyclists, you'll know there are all sorts of rules about the cycle saddle. Now I've got some kind examples here. These are high quality, lovely saddles that look fantastic, don't they? But this is the sort of racing type style of saddle with quite a long nose to it and a narrow bottom, and also hard. So my saddle I cycle on's got a bit of padding to it, which is great for going over the bumps, isn't it, on the bones. But for competitive cycling, and if you're really going to want to push things and go fast, you need a hard saddle. You don't want any padding in it, because that doesn't give you the same kind of push down when you're cycling. There are also very strict rules about the angle the saddle can be at. And British Cycling had managed to make an appeal to the international cycling rule makers to allow the saddle to be tipped down at a slightly greater angle, not as much as that, but to be tipped down so that for women, meaning for women and probably for men too, I would imagine, they weren't getting so much pressure, because of course they're pretty well horizontal in body, and there's a huge amount of pressure on the front of the pubic area, on that pubic bone. And sometimes for women it can be really uncomfortable pressing down on the clitoris. That's obviously our most sensitive area, but men too get troubles with their saddles. And it's long been known that men quite often get pressure to the nerves and have problems with erections after prolonged cycling, after things like a Tour de France or whole days in the saddle. And that's been published and known about for a long time. When I was a medical student, everybody knew that. But the women's problems, as quite often happens with vulval problems, get kind of, not talked about quite so much. But now it's all coming out. So saddles. Now, there are all kinds of different shapes of saddles, aren't there? Maybe you know much more about them than I do. This sort of thing here, and you can get saddles that have the split right down through the nose, so that the front bit has a little split as well. The idea with those is that when you lean forward, your very sensitive bit, i.e. the clitoris, is not pressing right up against the saddle. But it's tricky, isn't it? Because with something with a hole in the middle, as you cycle, of course, you're kind of moving from side to side. So you're going to be moving to right to left. So it's not like your clitoris in the middle of the vulva is sitting absolutely stationary in the middle. It's not, it's moving from side to side. So even the split saddles are a bit of a problem, because you are going to be getting some pressure as you move from side to side. I'm a bony bottom sort of person, so having some padding at the back end is comfortable for me, but then I'm not a very forward cycling person. But if you are a real forward cycling person, then it is difficult not to get some pressure at the front. And probably as you cycle, it's a good idea to try and kind of move forwards and backwards a little bit, so you're not always pressing on the same area. Numbness after cycling is often a problem for men, but it is a problem for women cyclists as well, is that sometimes they are pressing so hard on the nerves in the undercarriage area that they do damage the nerves, usually temporarily, and things recover after a day or two, but that can be a problem as well. Any of you long distance cyclists noticed numbness? Yeah. So you don't necessarily have to be an Olympiad level person to get these problems. Okay, so chamois cream.
As a comment to that, it's very important for people, because a commuter cyclist doesn't know too much about cycling sizing. It's very important to go get yourself measured and get the right size first.
For saddles?
The size of the saddle.
Yes.
So you can go to a bike shop and sit on a memory foam pad where your sit bones, you can mark temporarily, so they can measure that. So the width of your pelvis, let's say, shows what size of saddle you need, and that solves half the problems already.
Some places I gather you can borrow a cycle for a day or something and just kind of actually cycle around on it. So I think if you're going to be doing more than just half an hour to work and back, that's a really good idea to make sure you've got the right thing. Do any of you have the split saddles? Do you find them good? Find them better than the?
Yeah.
So even with the side-to-side movement, there's less pressure.
When the saddle is wide enough, the side-to-side movement reduces, and so the idea is that your core is steady.
Mm-hmm.
It should not move from one side to another as much as possible, so the power is going to your legs. The more the body moves, it's unstable on the bike, the more the power it loses from the interesting point, that is the pedals. So ideally, when someone has been fit on the bike, or the bike has been fit on a person, the core doesn't move that much. It stays steady and the legs go with it.
And that'll depend on the correct.
So that's why the saddle height is very important. The width of the saddle itself is very important, and the position, the distance from the bar, and so on. So bike fit is very, very useful to have.
Yeah, I was going to add that I think it probably makes a big difference what type of bicycle you have, because you're in a different position on a racing bike and a different position on a Dutch bike, and I'm pretty sure that changes quite a lot. Like, for example, I have a Dutch style bike, so I'm not so bent down, so I've never had any problems, probably because of my position.
Yeah, I'm not a very
You
head down
can use the
one.
same saddle on different types of bikes, for example. It doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, but I'm just saying the position of your body, so depending where you put pressure changes from.
Yeah, so the fit is
how you
actually
are.
the type of the bike, really. You need a different fitting for a different bike. So yeah, it depends on different assessment.
So I'm ignorant on this. If I wanted to get properly fitted on my bike, where would I go? Where could you go to make sure your distance? And I mean, normally I just see, can I reach the pedals and put my feet on the ground? Is how I decide on the saddle height. But it's clearly much more to it than that.
Yeah, so there are professional bike fitters. A lot of bike shops have an in-house service as well. So they have a bike which is not an actual bike. It's something that is flexible. They can adjust every part of an ideal bike. So before you buy a bicycle, you can do that at a shop, and they can measure your symmetry, your body symmetry, let's say your analogy. So then they will tell you what size of frame you need initially, and also what other things. So if you are a road cyclist with a drop bar, and they measure your shoulders, they can tell you how long, how wide the bar should be. Sometimes it's very wide, sometimes it's very narrow. That makes a difference. The saddle is something that can be adjusted anyway, so the important is the horizontal bar of the top tube of the bike. That's very useful because I don't know it parks very well.
Is that what it's called?
So the top tube.
Okay.
And that's what makes the difference between female and male bikes. So women have a shorter core and longer legs compared to men that have longer legs and longer core and shorter legs, so our waist is higher. So the female bikes tend to have a shorter top tube, so the bar is closer to our bodies. You don't need to stretch that much. And there are bikes that are somewhere in between. So there are women with longer cores that they have a big proportion of a man's body as well. So it's not really 100% that you should get a female bike. So that's why the fit gives you a good guidance on like what's highly best for you.
And do you do that here? Do you adjust bikes to suit people?
We can, but only to a certain extent. So we don't do professional bike fittings here. What I could do after this is we do know bike fitters that we recommend in the area. I could compile that and post that on the Facebook page. So if you know anyone, so we'll have that information after the session for you.
Do you know any who are specific for women? Because I've been to one with a man doing it, and when I've spoken about, I get pressure on the front, and he's just like, oh, yeah, whatever, that's common.
No,
I
this
do
is
know-
wrong. No.
I do know one female
Okay.
bike fitter who
Who can
yeah,
help.
I'll put her on the list.
I know one male that is also great though. For
Okay.
There are different types of assessment. So the one I did, for instance, the guy is observative, so he looks and he sees the motion of my legs and which one felt weaker and not, and he did some he asked me to do some single-legged squats to see how my body moves and so on. I'm hypermobile as well, it makes a difference. Many other issues. So there is this assessment that is the visual one, the basic, let's say, and then if you are a competitive cyclist and you're more into professional stuff, there are very bespoke bike fitting sessions where they put like a sensor on the saddle and they can see exactly the pressure points. So you get a gradient map with like the red areas that are with higher pressure and the blue areas that are lower pressure. They can see that on the pedals as well. So they can see different parts in a digital way. It's a digital analysis, so that's more expensive, more bespoke.
And if you're just your average cyclist who's got quite a nice racing bike, but not doing perhaps high-powered things, can you just make an appointment and have this sort of thing done? And there's any feeling that if you're not sort of very good, they won't pay as much
It has
attention?
nothing
Or
to do with that. It's all about how you feel on the bike, and because our bodies are not perfect and they're not symmetrical, and there are different points of sensitivity. The bike fit I had was the basic type, so he was observing me, and we tried different positions of things, and I appear to be very sensitive in very little things. So the cleats is also actually clipped in. It is very important, the position of the cleats on the foot position, foot squat. So I had them two very close on my toes, and my toes were getting numb. We moved them backwards more in the middle, and then I was getting strains on my arch because I have very high arch, and because of my hypermobility as well. And the arch tends to be higher than when we walk, when we're on the bike. So we moved it somewhere in between, and we find a spot where it felt really much more comfortable. And before my bike fit, I was tending to put a lot of pressure on my quads. Now I can use my glutes and my hamstrings. I can choose which muscle, with minor movement on the saddle, I can choose which muscles I want to use. It made a big difference.
very interesting.
We have a question, just because you mentioned numbness on the saddle, and it's, would repeated episodes of numbness potentially damage nerves permanently?
Well, yes. I think repeated, as long as it recovers fairly fast, like over a day or two, probably all right. But if you get more prolonged numbness, then that does suggest there's more permanent nerve damage. So that would be a bit of a red flag about something perhaps being not quite right. So there are some nasty things that can happen to people with their vulval areas. One would be permanent numbness, although I think that's less common sometimes than long-term swelling. So I do see a few women in the clinic who are keen cyclists or do a lot of cycling, and one of the problems that I have seen more than once is permanent swelling. So if you imagine you're cycling now down the roads, you hit a few potholes, because there are a few potholes around, you get some jarring. I mean, it is possible you get home and you think, oh, that's really sore, and you look down and you find you've got a swelling with bruising, you've got a really bad bruise and it's a bit puffed up on one side or both. And you would expect that to go down, of course, as a bruise would do. But what happens when you have a bruise? is that you're actually tearing the tiny little blood vessels, so you're getting a bleed under the surface of the skin. Now, as well as blood vessels in the skin, there are lymphatic vessels, and they just drain tissue fluid. So when you get swollen ankles on a hot day, what clears that swelling is your lymphatic drainage, and that's a one-directional from the outside to the inside. And you've got the same sort of system in the vulval area, draining away any free fluid. But those are tiny little, even more fragile vessels than the blood vessels, and they can also get damaged if you get a swelling or repeated bashing to the skin. And once they're damaged, they don't recover so well. And that can lead to permanent swelling, which is kind of rubbery, sometimes even hard, and it doesn't go down from one day to the next. So if that is happening, that may be an indication that there's some permanent damage to the soft tissue under the surface of the skin. I think that's a more common problem that's long-term rather than the nerve damage. And sometimes in addition to that, or instead of, women or men as well, who do a lot of cycling can develop sort of firm lumps or nodules that are like little sort of localized pressure point, almost like a corn on the foot. You know, if you get you wear these shoes and it's always rubbing on the little toe, you can get a corn, and you can get the same sort of process going on in the skin down below, where the skin kind of is damaged, it tries to protect itself and recover, and instead of sort of making an invisible mend, you get a little hard lump that develops. And they can be really quite difficult, but they can respond to surgery to cut them out. But that's one situation where a surgical intervention can be useful. Unfortunately, for the sort of puffed up swelling, if that becomes permanent, there isn't an easy answer to that. Come back to all the surgery in a mo. What about chamois and chamois cream? If you're a cycling short wearer, you'll know about chamois in cycling shorts. Anybody not know about chamois? Yeah. So this was something of very great interest to me, was the business about a chamois I'd always thought it was what my dad used to use to clean the car with. No, there's lots more to chamois than that. A chamois for a cyclist is a sort of triangular bit of padding, if you like, that sometimes comes in the shorts ready sewn in. So if you look at some cycling shorts in the shops, they have sometimes padding for underneath, but sometimes you can get things that you slip into a bit in the shorts. And chamois come in all different forms. They're sometimes just foam, they're sometimes kind of rubbery things, and they're like sometimes like gel, a layer of gel things. That seemed to be a very important aspect for elite cyclists, was to get something that would take the pressure off a bit but actually spread it round. So if you imagine our situation of leaning forward on a saddle, there's a lot of pressure coming just over the pubic bone at the front. If you could, instead of it coming right on the bone, you could kind of spread that onto the bone and round next door, you could spread the same load onto a larger area. And probably the best layer for that is something like the gel foam, like if you wear those party feet things which you put in your shoes. That sort of firmish but not hard, but a bit compressible, but it would give you support around the side of the most pressure. They're a bit sweaty, of course, so you trade the pressure spreading business for something, like wearing an occlusive pad all the time, so not perfect. There is a thing called chamois cream, which is usually a silicone-containing cream that you put on. It makes your skin a bit slippery. So silicone is sometimes put in nappy creams for babies, and you sometimes see it advertised on the telly in the summer. There's a wonderful advert about ladies with larger thighs. Are you chafing in the hot weather? And you put this cream on and everything just slides nicely. The idea is the same with chamois cream that you can buy in a sports shop, and the idea is that it provides a little slippery surface to the skin that makes the cloth rub over it a bit better. It's also used in hospitals to try and prevent pressure sores. You know, people are in bed a lot, they need turning. Having this stuff on the skin that makes the skin a bit slippery. It's like having a silk sheet, I suppose. You just turn over better.
Not the same as the loop, but yeah,
it sort of stays there. The slight problem with any cream is you know, is it going to irritate your skin? Is it going to, you know, make more problems? And you won't really know until you try. Probably the best thing with a chamois cream, which is the slippery cream, is not to use it too often, just for sort of special occasions, really. As you know, well, special cycling occasions. As you'll know, there's always a lot of chat about the London Marathon and people putting Vaseline on every sort of nipple, groin, you know, feet, to try and keep things slippery. I mean, that's another possibility, but if you're in the saddle and can't get down inside your cycling shorts, it's a bit difficult to keep putting Vaseline down there, and that's a bit sort of sticky, but can be a useful addition.
We have a really good chamois cream here that we highly recommend. It doesn't have silicone, it's vegan, it's all natural.
It's amazing.
I can vouch for this. I use it all the time. Long distance, like it doesn't build up and get manky, like, yeah. And we have little trail sizes.
Oh, I was thinking
like,
that wouldn't go very far for very long, but that's a trial.
Yeah, it's a try it out, because you don't want to commit to a giant.
Indeed, that's a great idea.
I think they're $3.50 and they smell really good.
Yeah, it's really nice smell.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
don't use Vaseline, it burns.
Vaseline's a bit.
It doesn't
Leaves are kind of greasy. But yes, that sometimes that can make a big difference to how you are at the end of a long day. Probably not worth it for 30 minutes to work and back, but otherwise.
Can I ask a delicate question, just as I have the opportunity to? Has anyone got sensitive skin and has found that that's okay? I've never dared try it.
I don't know if I've got sensitive skin or not. Sometimes stuff gets angrifies my skin, but I wouldn't know. I don't know if I'm like a sensitive skin person. But it's been fine. It's
an irritated skin.
It's not got very much like harsh stuff in it, has it? It's like natural, vegan, and hasn't got it's not like mega chemical.
I can read the ingredients. Brassica campestris oil, macadamia terrifolia seed oil, eco soya soy wax, coconut butter, vegetable glycerin, clove oil, tea tree oil, canola oil, and Egyptian oil. And you can smell it if you like.
So, as a general tip, if you're wondering about sensitive skin, you can always try something somewhere else before actually putting it.
That's way more sensitive than that.
But you can work up to it, right? You just try it.
So basically, anybody can become allergic or irritated by anything, whether they're vegan or you know, homeopathic or body shop stuff that hasn't been tested on animals or whatever it might be. You won't know until you've tried using it. And actually, that's how we would do it in the skin clinic. This is the next most sort of sensitive bit of skin. Well, you could use it here, but nobody wants to do that. And the idea is to use it regularly every day on the same patch. And if after about a week of regular use you haven't reacted, you're probably all right to give it a go somewhere else. But even if you've been using it for 3 years, you can still develop a sensitivity to it. So it's no guarantee that, you know, it's okay today, but it'll still be okay next year. So you've just got to keep a watching eye. Talking about skin, sorry, go for it.
Just on the theme of things that you put there, I did a bit of cycling, and it was like every day, 6 to 8 hours on the saddle, and I had, you know, the swelling, the numbness, the whole thing. I don't think that my saddle was really appropriate for me, but I had hair, and then I thought maybe the hair is not really helping. It's really coarse and stuff, and then I cut it a little bit, and then it was worse because it was like the stuff was kind of like stabbing me all the time. And then I thought, because I'm about to go on a very long cycle tour now, I thought maybe if I tried to condition it, like just to make the hair softer. I don't know if it condition like hair conditioner is something that you
just
don't
fluff
put
it
on
up.
there, or could I try?
I think you could put it on the hair. Sometimes the problem with hair conditioner is if it gets caught in the, you know, between the flaps, that can be quite irritant, and it's quite easy for anybody in the shower they're conditioning, and they don't realise that as it kind of runs down, you can get it getting between the lips of the vulval area and actually sort of staying there is an irritating thing. However, the program we developed for the athletes was to make sure that they did quite a bit of moisturising down there, and to use a liquid moisturiser to wash with, so not a soap or a shower gel or something like that, but a sort of lotion moisturiser that wouldn't be a foamy kind of thing, but would just help to kind of feel that you were cleaning the area, and then to apply a moisturiser after washing particularly onto the sort of groin area in the crease there, which is probably the area that gets rubbed most, because when you cycle or do any other kind of sitting on a saddle business, what you're doing is you've got a friction of your cycling shorts against the skin, no matter how lovely the cycling shorts are, and it's like rubbing off the surface of the skin, so you're taking away the very surface protective layer of the skin, and if you overdo that, just like with a new pair of shoes, you take it right off and you get down to a blister or a raw area. But even just 6 hours in the saddle, you're doing a lot more friction to the skin than normally would happen. So by having a little bit of light moisturiser greasiness on the skin, that gives you a mini protection to start with. And then when you've finished for the day, if you can try and put a little bit more of that barrier protection back in the form of a cream, your skin will recover nicely, or at least.
Would it be just like a regular moisturiser? Or?
Yeah.
Yes, again, it's a little bit about finding something to suit, so preferably non-perfumed, but every moisturiser has got things in it that you potentially could react to. So, you know, if you go into Boots or Superdrug or whatever, you'll find that they've got some not too expensive non-perfumed moisturisers. It's a question of finding one that you like the feel of. You know, some people like stickier, greasier ones, some people like lighter ones. The lighter ones contain more in the way of preservatives to stop them going off because they have more water in them. So, you know, it's a bit of a trial and error to find something.
So like aqueous cream or...
Aqueous creams has got a preservative in it that would suggest is best not to leave on, but that's quite a good one to wash with. But something like that, you know, they don't have to be expensive, that you can put on and leave on.
What about like lanolin?
Oil, yeah. Coconut oil, yeah. Olive oil, yeah. And some people like those. I mean, olive oil is.
Use that as well, yeah.
What about lanolin?
Lanolin. Well, lanolin is a very good moisturiser, but you can become allergic to lanolin, or some people can become allergic to lanolin. Very good moisturiser, but it is in the list of, you know, top 50 things that you can become allergic to. If you're not allergic to it, it's fine. If you are, it's a problem. So most creams now, they try to make they do have lanolin in. They change to it being a hypoallergenic lanolin.
So that doesn't include Lansino then. So like pure lanolin,
yeah.
Any other mums in there? You put it on your nipples with breastfeeding.
Yes.
So
depends what sort of lanolin it is.
Right.
So sometimes they take out the more allergy-making constituent of it. It was calendula cream in my day for nipples. Maybe that's gone out of fashion.
Are there any products that would increase your likelihood of getting yeast infection, or did that come up with any?
Yeast infections, I don't think any of the moisturiser products will do that. If you use a lot of steroid cream in the area, that can be a problem. The most common thing, of course, that makes yeast get to the top of the list is taking antibiotics. If you have a water infection or whatever, they're usually. I mean, yeasts, Candida is not as such an infection. Probably most of us have got Candida on board, yeast, and it's a question of the balance. So if you take antibiotics, you get rid of lot of the normal bacteria that live in the vagina, and the yeast that is there is able to multiply more. If you're in balance, then you've got a bit of yeast, and you've got several different bacteria that live up there, and it's all just kind of nicely under control. And if things go out of balance, then yeast can be a problem.
But things like oil, like coconut oil, wouldn't.
Shouldn't be a problem. The yeast is in the vagina. I mean, obviously, if there's masses of it, you can get surface problems, but the main problem is in the vagina, and you usually not putting your oils up there. So from that point of view, chamois cream, cycling products, if you like, are not likely to be a problem. What can be a problem is if you're in a very occlusive environment. Women who get repeated thrush, we try and say let the air circulate. Don't wear panty liners every day. If you're sitting in fairly sweaty lycra with a chamois bit of padding, it's all fairly occluded down there. So that general imbalance of what you're changing the environment, so different things might grow better or worse.
Connected to that, so I don't get problems with yeast infections or any of those things, but I do when I go on long cycles for holidays, or I cycle like about 25 kilometres a day back and forth to work. I wear like bib shorts, and I have a few sets, but I'll wear them for a couple of days. I get to work and have a shower, and that's and then have a shower when I get home. But I'm just wondering, how bad is it? I'm not noticing any symptoms or any problems, but how bad is it to wear the same set for that much? For like 50
it's probably all right if you're having 8 hours between wearing it. So you wear them to work. You yourself shower.
Yeah.
You put the same shorts on to cycle back home again. So in that 8 hours, or whatever it's going to be, they'll be dried out, and whatever's there will probably have died.
Okay. So it will.
Right.
Stuck around, I guess. So then it's a cushioned bit. So
yeah, cushioned bit.
Get in, and I don't know.
I think it's probably all right.
Okay, good, great.
Yeah, I mean, almost in some ways, having 2 showers a day could be, if you're using a lot of
soap,
if you're using it, you just hose down.
Yeah.
Probably best. Yeah, I think if you use a lot of sort of shower gel and stuff, that would almost be more damaging than putting the same shorts back on.
Yeah. Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, would it be? I think in the summer, if it was you were really sweaty, and you thought, I don't fancy putting those on the trip back, worth taking a second pair. But probably from the germ point of view, it's okay.
Thank you.
You mentioned these lumps that can occur. If they don't hurt, this is the question here. If they don't hurt, would you recommend surgery still, or is it just something you think?
No. Wouldn't recommend surgery if it's not painful.
Okay.
So they're the 2 sorts of lumps. There's the sort of whole swelling for one of. It's usually on the outer lip, the labia majora, the kind of bit that's got the hair on the outside. They can sometimes swell up and stay swollen up, a bit like a sort of sausage. And they can be a bit uncomfortable because it makes things asymmetrical. But these localized little lumps that can sometimes develop, if they're not painful, I wouldn't recommend it being removed. But just sometimes it's right on the bit that presses, like if you get a corn or something, it's always on the same bit and you're always resting on it. Then surgery in a few circumstances can be worthwhile.
Okay.
I realise I'm not repeating the questions, am I? I failed miserably.
No, I didn't. I forgot as well.
Would you like to talk about something else, or would we just interrupt you asking too many
questions? Yes, no, you can interrupt. We can always go back if we
missed lumps, almost like ingrown hair, let's say. I do wax the whole lot, and if they come up, they will be around for a week. They are painful, but then they go away, but sometimes not very quickly. Is there a way to help that?
If they're what I'm thinking, they could be. So whether you do anything to the pubic hair or not, but it's more common if you do particularly either shaving or waxy type things, you can get an infection in the hair follicle, and that that comes up, well, like a spot on the face really, except it is an infection as opposed to being acne. Then sometimes if you get a really close look, you can see it's just where a hair comes out, but sometimes you just see a little lump. And they can be unnoticeable, or they can be the size of a pea, or they can get to broad bean size if you're unlucky, and of course when they're inflamed they can be quite sore. It is a very common problem for hair removal sites. It's quite common women's legs, obviously a lot of hair removal can go on with legs. Less common under the arms actually, but also common in the groin area, and it's because of damaging the skin, damaging the follicles, that you get an area that's not protected in the normal way, plenty of bacteria hanging around, one just gets in. Nothing, well, you might be able to get it to settle a little quicker with an antibiotic cream, but they usually just kind of run their course. If you get lots and lots of them, and sometimes, you know, not cyclists particularly, but women who've done a lot of hair removal or have just been unlucky, they can get lots of spots all coming continuously, and then probably we would go for long-term antibiotic treatment.
Does pseudocreme do any good to it, or nothing?
Just might make you feel a bit better while it's there.
Can cycling exacerbate varicose veins?
Well, you can get varicose veins in the vulval area, particularly after childbirth. You've got a large lump pressing down, and the blood is not returning in the normal way. And the same way, if you're very overweight, you can sometimes get varicose veins in the legs, and of course with pregnancy it's another thing that makes varicose veins come up. Whether it's entirely due to the pregnancy or being very overweight, or whether you've got a bit of a tendency to get them to start with, don't know, because varicose veins can run in families. So I don't think cycling can affect them.
The ones that are in that area?
In the vulval area, no, I don't think so. But some women and men probably do get varicosities in the vulval undercarriage area, but I don't think that's a cycling related thing. And you've got good with varicose veins to keep the circulation going, so cycling can only be good, I would think. It's probably the baby's fault.
Yeah. Lots of things for the baby's fault.
Yes. Now, what else can I tell you about? What do you want to know about? Underwear. Well, I didn't think people wearing bib shorts wore underwear.
I do.
No.
I do. So it's a sort of personal thing, I guess, and what you feel most comfortable in. I guess it's like thinking about the shorts. You don't want something that's going to wrinkle up around the edges, do you? You don't want something that's going to rub. You don't want something that's going to kind of fold over in the wrong places. But I don't know. I've never worn cycling shorts, so I don't know the comfort or discomfort of wearing undies as well as the shorts, but I understand that lots of people don't wear underwear.
Can I share my experience from that maybe as well? Some people might find it useful. I've discussed it before, and they thought it was a bit too much to discuss, but we're here today, so I think it's okay. So I started cycling no more than 2 years ago, and then I was cycling with my underwear. I didn't know that if you cycle without underwear, it could be better for you. I did try it, it made things worse. The reason why, and I did look up a lot on the internet to see what's going on, is that some people have more skin than others. So for the vulva, let's say there are the innies and the outies, so there are women that have a lot of lips, and some women are tighter. And that makes a big difference in the way it rubs on the saddle. I find most of the problems coming from my skin rubbing on my skin rather than rubbing on the saddle or the padding of the shorts. So having underwear keeps everything in place somehow, and there's less irritation. When I try to do it without underwear, I really suffer.
Okay, so you're getting then, if you wear underwear, fairly tight, I would imagine, rather than
I have
baggy,
managed to
too
find
baggy.
seamless underwear without any stitching.
Very good.
Which also the padding in the middle is stuck to it, it's not stitched.
Doesn't the glue just come off?
No. I've been using them for almost a year now, and they're still okay, and they haven't stretched or something.
I would imagine that. So then, when you're getting friction, you're probably getting knickers against cycling shorts as opposed to skin against cycling shorts.
Exactly. So it kind of takes that kind of irritation. I still use the Charlotte cream on it, so it does feel fresh and it takes every like other kind of rubbing away. Also, the other reason is I feel like when I wore without underwear, all the Charlotte cream was absorbed by the time, and it was not there for too long. Let's say it kind of did dry out, but I'm talking about like long cycling. So I don't know, maybe I would probably need to refresh it and have a break after, I don't know, 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers and replace it. But that's what I experienced last year when I started learning about all these things.
So there's quite a lot of debate about labia minora in just general terms. So you know, with your vulva, you've got the fleshy outer lips that are the ones with hair on the outside, called the labia majora, which means big lips, and then the sort of thinner ones on the inside, labia minora, or inner lips, and then you've got the vaginal opening in between. So there's a lot of concern nowadays about, you know, what's normal. Should they stick out in the middle or should they not? And there's quite a cosmetic surgery industry springing up about, you know, making everything completely smooth and taking away the inner lips because people don't like the look of hanging down inner lips. And sometimes for some athletic things that can be uncomfortable. Sometimes women find if they're very unlucky or they've got very sensitive inner lips that it can be uncomfortable for intercourse sex as well. So sometimes it can be a bit of a worry, but lots of women get worried about the appearance. Should you have your inner lips sticking down beyond the outer lips? Well, it's like everything, like sizes of noses. There's every possibility known to man and woman of what your vulva can look like. There's a wonderful sculpture, I think it's in Germany, called Wall of Vulva. I don't know if you've seen all different, they're mouldings of lots of different women. It's quite unusual considering the way the anatomy is. That most women's inner labia don't cause problems. They're just sort of there. They're quite soft. They just sort of pack in, and they don't cause a major bother. But just occasionally, if they're very asymmetrical, stick out a lot, then they can be uncomfortable, and you can find ways around it usually. They do get smaller with age, so if you're worried about them now, you will find that when you're more my age, you're wondering where they've gone. I knew they were there once, but they got smaller. So I don't know what will happen to young women now if they have their labia minora trimmed off. What will happen when they're so unless there's something very unusual about them, I would say keep them as they go, and there are ways around it. You can obviously.
Cyclists do something about it if they have a problem.
Nobody admitted. I don't know. Nobody talked about it, but I think sometimes they can be a bit rubby for some people.
This is oversharing potentially. So my labia minora are larger, they come down a bit. I tuck them in with the bigger ones. Just tuck it round. And you sit on it and then you right. You sit on your bike, so they extend.
Soft enough just to pack in, aren't they? Yeah. You just might need to do a bit of arranging before you settle.
Women have these problems with, you know, relatively small body parts. What do men do? They've got a whole thing outside.
Yes. They tuck it upwards. But they get saddle sore rubs and just the same sort of thing. But they have obviously the way things are manoeuvred, they get a different sort of pressure. In fact, in some ways, a woman's undercarriage, because the outer lips are quite fatty, aren't they? They're quite sort of soft. We've got a little bit of sort of natural padding underneath there that men don't have in that particular spot. So I didn't. Yeah. And men, interestingly, men seem when they did this, they did sort of questionnaire with the Olympic squads, male and female. Only one man responded to the questionnaire.
Well, because I think men don't have issues. I feel like because I go to the track and I'm just like, oh, they're fine. They just look so comfortable.
Yeah.
And like, it's
I
just,
think they do get issues, but they don't say it.
talk about it.
Either talk
They
about
just
it
cry
or
in the
they
corner
don't.
when they go.
And it's, either they do get rub areas as well, and they do get this sort of numbness sometimes, but it doesn't seem to be such a bother in actually affecting their cycling performance, I guess.
Maybe they're less prone to infections at least. So that
Yes, they don't get the thrush problem. And of course, women, we haven't talked about periods and how do you cope with, a period, but obviously wearing pads is not very comfortable if you're cycling. Tampons is usually is more comfortable as long as the string doesn't get sort of caught outside and rub. But if you're not a tampon user or you don't like them, then it can be a bit tricky on period days. The other thing, of course, you can
irritating too, though.
if you take the pill, if you take the pill and you've got a big race coming up, of course you can take two packs of pills back to back, which is generally accepted as being okay now, unless there's some particular reason not. But usually you can just run 2 months together and get over that bit.
Or an IUD and then you don't get them at all.
There are different ways of dealing with it, but of course that's another challenge, isn't it? Now, what haven't I talked about that's your burning questions?
Can I ask, we were talking about the different issues with the Lego manure. So wearing underwear or tucking everything in, what other things have people done? Like, does anyone use creams in there or like?
So I guess you could use the chamois type cream, which would just sort of take things down.
Okay.
You can tuck them in and keep them in. You can make sure you're well Vaseline or chamois creamed up beforehand if you know that you tend to rub a little bit. You can think about the saddle shape, because that might help to, if you had a split saddle, that might help to take away some of the central pressure. Yeah, I don't know. Any other thoughts?
I have a saddle cover, which is a padding. It's a pad that you can put temporarily. So if you're a bit sore, you want to recover, let's say, and you're in the recovery period, you can use an extra pad on the saddle, so you can make it a bit softer, say, for a week or so things come up to normal. It does help.
Well, I guess the other thing would be after a cycle, if you can make sure you put some moisturising, soothing cream on, might just help it to recover a little bit quicker.
I think I'm a minority here because I don't wear bib shorts or padded shorts or cycling shorts. I just wear leggings. I cycle in normal trousers and I cycle in skirts in the summer. And I don't use chamois cream. And should I be worried? Like, should I be doing something? Like, will I get something?
How long are you riding for? That's what is important. How far are you going? For how long?
Well, on weekdays I do a total of 25 kilometers, 2 hours a day.
You don't need anything. Probably.
If everything's comfortable, I don't think
Yeah,
you
no, I'm
need
like,
to
I only
change.
work an hour away from home. I'm not like doing.
You must have just the right saddle to suit your body. And
I don't know, I've changed saddles, so we'll see how my new saddle is. My old one was perfect. Bouncy and fine, but we'll see.
Can I ask about saddles? I mean, maybe it's a more kind of technical question, but so my saddle's really old and actually falling apart, so I need to get a new one. And I got this one, many years ago, and since then, given birth, so presumably my area is a different shape or size or something since then. How often do women or anybody have to get a new saddle, say?
Too technical for me, I think.
Okay.
If it hasn't dropped apart and it's still comfortable, I would say, why would you want to change it? But you're perhaps more experts. The reason I changed my saddle is because it gets those little splits.
Oh yeah, mine's got cracks
and then you
in it like that.
sit on it when it's wet, and you get a big wet patch on it. So that's why I changed my saddle. But I'm sure you must have all different reasons.
There's different saddles for different rides. So as someone mentioned before, whatever position you're on the bike will change the position that your sit bones would be in. So you need a different saddle to accommodate that. One thing I've been dying to start is a saddle library where people can just
that'd be
test
cool.
different types of saddles.
I'll be one of your guinea pigs for that.
But we're trying to figure out, like, you know, how would it, logistically, how would that work? You know, how long people get to keep it for? What if it gets stolen? That kind of stuff as well. So it's not, it's on my list of things to do, and I'd really like to see it happen. But so if anyone's got ideas on how that could work,
Some shop that does it. SMP, you know, these are the really fancy expensive ones. Like they just are just looking at the website, and I haven't called the shop to see if it actually works, but they have a massive list of shops that they now supply with saddles for trial, and they make them bright yellow in a color that doesn't. So it's very,
Obvious.
it's obviously it's a test one. So people would be a bit more ashamed of like actually stealing them. But I don't know how it worked exactly, but yeah, I've only found one place. I know that they have a program. At least, and it's keen on. What's it called? SMP. SMP. They are Italian.
So they're in London, or something.
They don't have their own shop, but if you look at their website, they have, at least in theory,
Also, they send them to
lots
you.
of yeah, I don't know if you do that, but a few shops there they supply with maybe not all models, but all because they're expensive. So I was keen on trying one before. But I haven't had a chance to actually phone up to see if the program really works or not. Yeah.
Jenny, do you have any of the foam things here to sit on so you can measure your butt bones?
I don't know where we would get that. Like, I've heard of that. I mean, I guess we could DIY it.
Yeah, they do it.
I think it's a cardboard. So you just get a cardboard and you sit on it, and then it just marks anyway. So you just there are lots of videos on YouTube showing how to do it with just a regular piece of cardboard. You don't need a super foamy thing.
The cycle surgery, yeah, it goes before it's easy to copy that.
Can I ask about after rides, soothing, like baths or cool water, or what's presumably all that bubble bath stuff is which is great for the rest of you, and also great for
Not so good for that. So
baths or salt things?
salt baths, okay, nothing wrong with salt baths. They can be quite soothing. Not too hot, I would say. So don't sit in as hot as you can stand. A little bit. I mean, if things are really uncomfortable and feel sore, I mean, sometimes people put sort of, you know, like ice packs or bags of peas, but I wouldn't do that for too long either, because the cold can damage the skin as well, but a short period. I would just get some loose clothes on after a shower or a bath without much in the way of detergent. You might want to use it on the other bits, but try and keep it away from there. Just some moisturising cream, and try and, you know, stay off, if it's sore, stay off the saddle for a bit. So it recovers.
Something that feels cool is nice, like creams that are actually
Yeah, some of those are
keep in the fridge.
Yes. You can keep any of the moisturisers in the fridge actually, and they feel nice when they go on. Yeah.
Natural aloe vera would be good, isn't it?
Aloe vera, yep, can be good, but like anything, you can develop a sensitivity to it. So nothing, no matter how wonderful it might seem to start with, is 100% guaranteed never to cause you problems. Don't want that.
You mentioned to wash something like more of a creamy wash. Do you have any kind of like
Yes, well, the one we usually recommend is one called Dermal 500. It's I don't know, it's about £7 for 500 mils. It's quite a lotiony type, sort of soft, liquidy type thing, and it has got a little bit of antiseptic properties in it, so it just keeps the bacteria down a bit, which you don't need, but if you've got a sore bit that has actually rubbed through, that can be quite useful. You don't want to put that on and leave it on, because it's got quite a lot of stuff in that can be irritant if it's trapped in the folds, but it's quite good for washing them.
I had an E45 one as well.
E45, yeah. There's quite a lot of you can use any of those, any straightforward moisturiser really, with water, as if it's a kind of washing cream. They don't foam up or anything, but you can use it, massage it around a bit, and use it like a lifting off the day's neighbours.
So there's actually creams.
Yeah.
Then
So-
but you're using it as a wash.
Yeah, so quite a lot of the lighter creams will come with a pumpy thing now. So you get it, I would suggest you get in there, you wash your hair, you rinse off, and then you finish off with the down below with a washing cream. And then some of that will be left on when you dry off. So, you know, like you can buy moisturising washing creams, but they're all perfumed and stuff. I'd use a plain one. And then when you get out, it's not as dry as it would be. And then if you're feeling a bit sore, you can use something else just to give it a bit of extra. Or use the same one if it's a leave-on cream.
There's a question of myth actually. It's about post-menopause. Any advice for post-menopause when the body and undercarriage changes?
Yeah. So when you have a baby, lots of things change after a baby, never quite go back to how they were before. And when the menopause happens, a lot of other things happen. So you can lose some of the padding in the labia majora. So when you're young and youthful, they start off sort of fairly firm and smooth. And when post-menopausal, often that's an area where you can lose some of the fat. You can lose the pubic hair to a certain extent, and like I mentioned, sometimes the labia minora sort of disappear. So probably, and also the other thing that happens as you get older, particularly post-menopause, is the skin is much drier, less greasy. You know, 70-year-olds don't have to wash their hair as often as 17-year-olds do. Well, apart from keeping fresh, but from the greasiness point of view, everything dries up. So particularly important for postmenopausal women to make sure that they don't have dry skin. They use more moisturisers, and they might need a bit of extra padding because they can lose some of the natural fatty padding if they're not well endowed with a fat layer. But if they're a thin woman, they'll have a much thinner pubic fat layer than a thin young woman. So they might want to protect more.
A question about the saddle. So it should be angled down more and.
Well, it was just the angle of the saddle. There are rules for competition as to how, you know, it can go. I can't remember, 5 degrees or something like that. It's very slightly down. I think with you, if you're not in competitions, you can have it at whatever angle you like. The problem is you don't want it angled too down, otherwise you'll keep sliding off. And if you want to cycle fast, obviously you need to be at the right angle to be able to kind of get the sitting on the saddle to help you give some press.
Yeah.
But if you're finding that you've got quite, you know, if you're not competitively cycling, you've got a lot of pressure on the pubic bone at the front, angling it down a little bit more might make a difference.
Okay.
I don't know how you do that. You must know more about, presumably it's those things with screws in just under the saddle that you can change the direction of. Is that right? You can you angle your saddle however you like?
I can demonstrate.
It's still a
I mean,
like a bike thing
I think
as well.
a little bit of angle change can make quite a bit of difference.
So this is a modern Z-post. It's got this like curved shape thing here. We have to. There you go, Facebook friends. And when you loosen that bolt there on the bottom, it's usually a 6mm Allen key. You can then adjust fore and aft. It'll loosen the saddle rails, so you can move the saddle forward and back. You can also adjust the angle this way, but we recommend starting out with a 0 degree. Don't go too far forward. You'll put too much weight on your wrists. Don't go too far back because that'll just pressure on your hoo-ha.
That's a technical term.
You should experiment with it, but also like the human body is really adaptable. So I think the dangerous thing is you could get used to a really bad position as well, which is why I think going to a bike fitter is really good. Yeah, also different types of saddles for different types of bodies, and it's a minefield. Yeah.
And do you want to feel the pressure on your sit bones? Is that the ideal? Where you
I think when you're in a really racy position,
That's hard.
your sit bones are kind of
up.
up, so you're a bit more on your soft tissue, and that's where a lot of the pressure pain comes from. So
Also racing, they don't have, because the floor is very smooth, like if you're doing the track for instance, you don't have the bumps and the vibrations you get on the road. So that's, it's again a type of cycling issue. If you're doing endurance cycling, you get all sorts of floor quality, let's say. So you could get something in between, because you do need performance and endurance, but you need comfort as well. If you're a commuter, you can get like the old school saddles, they had like springs at the back. So they can get the bumps of the road really nicely, and you don't need to focus on performance because you're only commuting. So it really depends on the type of cycling you're doing.
So for you and me, we're sit back people, I
I
think.
have springs, like
You've
I
got
don't
springs,
care.
yeah. So if you're more of a sit-up person or a slightly forward, you're obviously going to be getting your sit bones will be on the back here. So you've got two areas of pressure. So you're already spreading the load. If you're in the lean forward position, you're all on this sort of little middle bit. So you've got what was in two sit bone areas all pressured down on one spot. So that's much more uncomfortable because the pressure is greater. So, I mean, you can get saddled with different widths of the nose or whatever it's called, but you don't want it so wide that it then rubs on the inside of your thighs. So that's another dilemma. It's got to be sort of thin enough that it's comfortable enough between your thighs, but obviously the wider here, you'll spread the load a bit more. But as you say, it's a minefield. I mean, there are hundreds of different shapes of saddles. If you're not competitive cycling, then a bit of padding is probably a good thing. I think the really hard saddles are probably more for somebody who's really upping the speed. But if you're not that concerned about your speed, then probably a bit of padding is a good idea. And
I would suggest not too much because it gets hot in the summer.
Yes.
And the saddle's too heavy as well. Like,
but the springs can just take
the
that
springs
away.
are good.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, somebody, was it you talking about somebody was talking about putting a gel cover. Obviously, if you want a bit of extra softness, you can just get the ones that kind of.
It tends to not be a bit slippery, so you can. The one I have has a bit of like jelly, kind of like spots underneath, so it kind of sticks on the saddle. It's not very slippery, but it can be slippery. So it's good for temporary use, but not really. It's best to get a padded shorts.
Saddle. Really. Yeah. Yes, that's the other thing. Is just wear extra shorts to put the padding there. Okay, have we exhausted the questions? I don't think I've got anything more on my list now. What was that one? Hoo-ha was it?
Did you want to ask?
No, just from the girls, if anyone's used one of those that has, you know, like a big curve down, which supposedly you have, and does it actually work?
Yeah, makes a massive difference. Mine's amazing, it's got a big hole in the middle.
But it does go curvy at the front, you say.
Yeah, no, some of them, you know, they have kind of like the cushiony thing at the back, and then not only they have the hole, but they actually kind of like have a curve downwards.
Like a dip. You mean?
Dip.
Yeah, I
exactly,
used to have one that had a dip, and now there's a hole instead of a dip. But yeah, they make a difference.
Yeah. Do you think hole's better than dip, or kind of?
It's a completely different kind of cycling. So I'm not going to say one's better than the other. It depends on the kind of cycling you're doing, I guess. Yeah.
But it's
just something that means there's some space for your bits.
Yeah,
is
exactly.
transformative.
Yeah, because the one I have has a hole, but not nearly big enough.
Yeah.
Just for ventilation as well.
So
no, that's for another one. So
Yeah.
nice to hear from. They do worse than, like, more like they squish things instead of.
There's more pressure on the smaller area.
Exactly.
It's good for ventilation. So it depends, it really depends, because the shapes are so different.
Difficult to know. I think try it out and see how you feel is the perfect answer. If you can find somebody who'll let you have it for a day or two, brilliant.
I have a kind of summary question, I guess. What do you wish GPs knew about vulval health to advise general patients coming to you?
Anyone a GP here?
None of us are likely to see an expert such as yourself unless something's really, really wrong, right? But in terms of just generally keeping everybody healthy, the GP is where you go. So
well, GPs have a big problem in that sometimes it's very difficult for them to examine a woman. I expect many of you, if you've ever had thrush, it's very easy to go to a GP, tell your story, and they'll say, that sounds like thrush, here you go. Where, of course, the ideal would be that they did actually have a look, but that really requires a chaperone, and sometimes they just can't find somebody to chaperone an examination. So that's their first challenge. So so I think for familiarity with what vulvae normally look like would be the first thing. Recognition of diseases that affect the vulva, but if you've got a healthy vulva but it's just been bashed around a bit because of cycling, again, knowing what normal looks like is important. I think, well, I guess we're lucky in Cambridge that we have very good GPs, and they are now much more aware of things that can go on down below, whereas I think 30 years ago nobody talked about it very much. In fact, women often didn't go to their GP because they were very embarrassed and thought that they would be sent off. So in terms of, I mean, vulval skin health is the same as skin health everywhere else. How to keep your skin functioning as well as possible usually means not doing too much to it, but knowing when to actually act is probably the thing, but that's experience. And I think GPs now are getting much more familiar with women and their vulval diseases and vulval health than they were 10 years ago even. So I think it's coming through. Don't know what your GP is like. If you go to a GP with a sore vulva and they don't examine you, I think you should ask to be examined.
What about a gynecologist to be referred to?
Gynecologist, yeah, gynecologist is good. Most dermatology departments in hospitals will have usually a female dermatologist with who is the vulval person. So, but of course, you know, the NHS, the way it works is that if your GP refers you to a gynecologist or a dermatologist, there's money involved that happens. So they have to think very carefully about, do they send you to see an expert, or do they see somebody else to see an expert? Or, that's the problem. Anyway, if you don't get examined, ask to be examined.
And following on from Roberta's question, what do you wish that we knew? And also maybe the general public as well, but like.
Well, I think it's very useful if you can have somebody you can ask about these things, because often women will suffer in silence. They're not quite sure it's normal, you should ask, blah blah, and it's sometimes difficult in male cycle environments. You know, somebody was saying they were adjusted very nicely by a male onto their saddle, but often you know, it's difficult saying, well, it presses on the front of my vulva when I lean forward to a chat. It can be difficult to do that. So I think having an environment in which there are people you can ask about these things is really helpful, isn't it? Just talk about it, because if you don't talk about it, nobody will do anything about it. So if you have a female-shaped saddle library, that would be a really good start, wouldn't it? And you know, creams to use and advice about ventilation and perhaps some sharing of pubic hair stories. So I think it sounds like you're doing a great job.
That's like a listicle for a Facebook page or something.
There's a pub around the corner.
Good. Okay, I haven't got anything else to tell you, I don't think, unless you've got anything else I haven't answered.
How can we find you? How can we support you?
Well, thank you very much for doing the questionnaires. I think if they're all anonymous, I'm very happy to send the results back to you, so that there's a bit of a starting point. So you'll know you're not weird if you tick one of the boxes. Yeah, you can contact me. You've got my email. Somebody's got my email. I don't mind answering a small number of questions if something comes up. Don't tell all your friends. It's a bit more tricky, but yeah, I think following on from the work with the elite cyclists, I mean, our hope was, I think British cycling's got a bit, you know, it's had a lot of things on its plate recently, with various things. But our hope was that we might be able to get it out into cycling magazines. We might be able to start targeting women as they start off on sort of their cycling journey, if you like, to make sure that people are aware of things before it gets too bad. So, I mean, this might be the start of that, because I think British cycling's got a bit way down at the moment. But maybe we'll come back to getting some articles in cycling mags and things. Do you read any of those? I don't know. They're sort of inspirational sometimes, aren't they? But getting out to the non-elite cyclists who are keen cyclists, do a lot of cycling, either for pleasure or for charity rides or for competitions, to actually know a little bit more about what needs going on down below before people do run into trouble. So perhaps I can activate that.
I think it's great because it also means we talk about it. Like, I've got friends who say that they have actually stopped cycling just because they're in so much pain from cycling, and I just think
Such a shame.
Yeah. Like, because maybe it just was a case of asking somebody and just kind of being open about it, and then realizing I don't need to stop cycling. I just need to talk about it and see what other solutions there are. So yeah, this is like awesome to have done.
Good. Okay. Well, lovely to see you all, and thank you for sharing your stories with each other, because you've taught me a lot as well. So that's been great.
Thank you.